So we're continuing our discussion now on communicating from one component to another, sending commands from one component to another. And what we've shown so far is how you can go to the interactive window in JavaScript, the console here, and just issue commands, call methods of the different grid objects that have all been instantiated. But this is not very practical right now. This is just really more for a learning exercise. So now let's go and let's just close this down temporarily. And let's just go here and refresh the grid. And now look at some methods of the grid object. So I'm going to go here and open up this row expander, and what I'm going to do now is, if you look inside this child grid here, you'll see that it has a button called Set the Sales field in the parent grid. So if I give focus, say, to that value over there, to row 2, and I click this button, what I'm going to do is update this field with this value over here, so with the value of the product ID from the current row. So if I go there and click it, you can see that we changed the value over there. If I go there now and click it, you can see we've changed the value over there. So in effect, what's going on is this button over here has sent a command to its parent and told the parent to update the sales rep field with a value from this field over here. So we're going to discuss how that was done, and then similarly, if you look here, for example, at this button over here, this is a button in the parent grid, and what this button over here is going to do is update the value of the product ID field with whatever the current value of the sales rep field is. But I'm not going to press this button right now because it's not going to actually work, and the reason it's not going to work yet is that getting the ID of a child grid is much more complicated than getting the ID of a parent grid, and the reason for that is that a child grid can only have one parent. So you can see here that obviously invoice items can only have one parent grid, whereas this parent grid here has got two child grids. So getting the ID or the alias of the child grid is a little bit more complex. So let's go back now to design mode and first see how this button worked, how this button was able to set a value in its parent. So we're back in the grid builder here, and let's go to design mode, and then let's go over to the invoice items grid. So here's our invoice items grid, and let's go over now to properties, and then in the above grid, you can see in the freeform area above the grid, I've just basically put in a button that says set the sales field. The button says set sales rep in the parent grid, and the button calls this JavaScript function called set sales rep in parent. So now let's go and take a look at what that JavaScript function does. So here we are. So so here's the set sales rep in parent function, and what this function does is, first it gets the value of the current row that has been selected in this child grid. So that would be grid object.underbar selected row. Then it reads the source value, which is the value from the product ID field. So it calls the get value method, and it's going to read from the grid part as opposed to the detail view part or the search part. It's going to read the product ID field from the row called row number. So let's pause now and pick this up in the next video.